Path of Exile 2's 0.3 update launches in less than a week, and one of the headline features for the patch is the Rise of the Abyssal League mechanic, which is going to introduce Abyss to PoE 2 in a new way. This mechanic is going to come with everything you'd expect, including new boss fights and new exclusive boss drop unique items, and in this video I'm going to be discussing a returning unique from PoE 1 that's going to be coming to PoE 2 in this update, the Darkness Enthroned unique belt. Now, I've seen some mixed reactions to this belt from some of the community, but I do think that this item has some extremely strong use cases. First though, let's discuss exactly how it works. The Darkness Enthroned comes with two sockets where you'll be able to place socketables. These include runes and soul cores, but also the talismans that were added in 0.2 and the abyssal eyes that are being introduced in this update. However, belts don't usually have sockets, and that means that they also do not have corresponding modifiers from socketable items. So instead, the Darkness Enthroned belt can drop with a specific armor type, and then it functionally acts as that type of gear for the purpose of obtaining modifiers from socketables that are placed into this item. So far, we know that the Darkness Enthroned can have the helmet modifier and the body armor modifier, but I think that it's fairly safe to assume that both a gloves version and boots version will also exist. However, I'm not so sure about weapons, offhands and the rest, as these are much more specific. For example, some socketables require a specific type of weapon, like a bow rather than just any weapon, and therefore I think that this belt will only be limited to dropping with the core 4 gear slots, that being helmet, body armor, gloves and boots. Now, in addition to the belt acting as a type of gear for the purpose of socketables, it will also amplify the modifier values from those socketables, and again, we're not so sure on the roll ranges on this one, but we've seen 72% and 87%. So I think that it's somewhat likely to have the same modifier roll range as PoE 1's version of this item, which would be 50 to 100% increased effect of socketed items. And that means that with a 100% perfect roll, you'd essentially have double the effect from those socketed items. Now, I do also want to address corruption outcomes before continuing this video. Belts cannot usually roll a corruption outcome that adds an extra socket, so I'm confident that this belt will not be able to be corrupted to add an additional socket, though it will be able to roll additional modifier magnitudes from corruption to improve the socketed effect modifier. Okay, so I think the true power of the Darkness Enthroned is not so much about the types of stats that can be obtained on it, but more so about how much of a single stat you can obtain collectively. This is where this new unique belt will be able to break the game in some scenarios. But there's another new addition in this patch that will also contribute to this: exceptional item bases. These new bases will drop with either exceptional quality, up to 30%, or an extra socket. In the case of an extra socket, the item will still be able to be corrupted to get another extra socket. So you can now potentially get one additional socket on gear pieces compared to the last patch. And together with the Darkness Enthroned, you can now get a massive amount of some stats that were previously difficult to obtain in large quantities. For example, Minion players will enjoy the new Talisman of Radakesh, which when placed in a helmet grants 8% increased reservation efficiency of minion skills. On its own, that's pretty good, but if you push it to the extreme, it can become quite ridiculous. If you have 3 of these socketed in your helmet and 2 in a Darkness Enthroned with the helmet roll, that's up to a potential 56% increased reservation efficiency of minion skills, and possibly even more with a good roll and corruption on the Darkness Enthroned. And yes, that's a big investment as it's all of your helmet sockets and it's your belt slot, but that's a lot of minion reservation efficiency. That's really good. Okay, what about Farrell's Rune of the Chase? For this one, we need to assume that the boots version of the Darkness Enthroned exists, but this rune provides 5% increased movement speed when socketed in your boots. That means that 2 of these socketed in a Darkness Enthroned could yield 20% increased movement speed, or even a little bit more than that. Would you trade your belt slot for 20% increased movement speed? I'll leave that one up to you. Now hold on, let's discuss one that might actually be a bit game breaking. The Talisman of Grold was added to the game last patch in 0.2, and it provides a unique stat that grants a chance for skills that empower attacks to not count an attack. So essentially, if this chance rolls successfully, your attack would be empowered, but it wouldn't spend the empower count on the skill. Empowered attacks include the buffs from Warcries like the extra fire damage from Infernal Cry, or the aftershocks from Seismic Cry, but it also includes the Barrage ability, the bonus damage from Emergency Reload, and Mantra of Destruction, to name a few. Now, it would be quite strong if you could raise that chance to 100% to be able to spam empowered attacks, right? Well, if there's a gloves version of Darkness Enthroned, that's exactly what you'll be able to do. Up to 60% chance from the belt, and a further 45% from 3 sockets in your gloves, would mean that every attack is empowered, but the empower count is never spent. That is quite powerful indeed, especially considering support gems such as Enraged Warcry and Volatile Power. And keep in mind that a skill can be empowered by multiple different sources. Okay, now for Thorns enjoyers, the updated Stag Talisman grants 50% increased Thorns Crit chance when socketed into a helmet. So that's a lot of increased Thorns Crit chance you can obtain between your helmet sockets and the Darkness Enthroned belt, up to 350% or more. Then there's the Great Wolf's Rune of Willpower, providing 10% of damage taken from mana before life when socketed into the body armor. Now, I discussed the fact that it's possible to reach 100% mana before life without the Mind Over Matter keystone in a previous video, but that involved a very specific method requiring considerable travelling on the tree to reach lots of jewel sockets. But now, with the introduction of this belt, it's very straightforward to obtain a huge percentage of mana before life. You can use any combination of the belt and your body armor sockets or points on the tree to obtain a decent chunk of mana before life if you wish. And I think this is going to be quite powerful in 0.3, considering the improved access to mana leech for different builds. Okay, let's discuss another interesting option, a Soul Core that provides 10% increased speed of Recoup effects when socketed in your boots. Now, I think Recoup is actually quite a good mechanic with investment. For example, the use of Sacrosanctum on a Chronomancer is quite strong when you're able to stack up a lot of Recoup. But part of the reason that Recoup isn't used much outside of the Chronomancer is the base 8-second window for Recoup's recovery to take effect. And so, being able to stack a lot of increased Recoup speed could unlock a similar potential to the Chronomancer's Recoup notable on a different ascendancy. Now, speaking of recovery, Creation's Rune of Recovery provides 50% increased energy shield recharge rate when it's socketed in a body armor. So that's potentially a lot of recharge rate you can obtain from stacking this one, and if we can glean any information from the Q&A after the reveal, the discussion about energy shield recovery may point towards recharge being one of the only good options in 0.3, so on a pure energy shield build especially, you're going to want to invest into recharge rate and faster start of ES recharge, and this rune may be a good option for that. Now lastly in this video, I want to mention this rune that provides 20% increased effect of exposure when socketed in a helmet. The reason I want to mention this rune is because of how the current Incinerate works in the game right now. Incinerate is being changed in 0.3, but prior to that patch taking effect, this skill would inflict a ramping exposure, and it had a maximum exposure that was written on the skill as a stat on the gem itself. However, increases to exposure effect not only applied to the exposure inflicted on monsters, but it also improved the maximum, allowing you to inflict a greater exposure with higher exposure effect investment. And in 0.3, Frostbomb is going to provide a somewhat similar ramping exposure, and it also has a maximum exposure written on the gem in a similar fashion. If this behaves the same way on Frostbomb as it did with Incinerate, you'll be able to scale the maximum exposure with modifiers to exposure effect. And considering the sheer amount of exposure effect that's possible from this rune combined with the passive tree and elsewhere, you may even be able to reach some crazy numbers like 150% maximum exposure, which sounds ridiculous, but right now it's looking like that may be possible if it does indeed work like Incinerate did. Now do keep in mind that exposure has 50% less effect on bosses in 0.3, but even with 50% less effect, that's a huge amount of potential resistance reduction if it does work. And there you have it, some interesting use cases for the new Darkness Enthroned unique belt. And overall, I don't think that this item is great for generic use to just, drop some runes in there and gain some stats, such as resistances and the like. But to be able to stack specific stats to levels that you previously could not, it's quite good for that. Let me know what you think about this item by commenting below, and thank you for watching this video. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.